Hello and welcome to the Northern Souls podcast. I'm your host Zeke and I am joined today by my lovely wife Keagn.
Hello.
So the purpose of this podcast will be to discuss, explore, and educate others on Norse paganism. Ultimately, our goal is to find the good life. So last time we kind of talked about how we were going to observe Disablot.
And a little bit about other holidays.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to just expand more on that and maybe talk about how Disablot was different for us, because even though I've technically been a Norse pagan for like 13 years, that was the first time that I've actually observed Disablot because, like I said in the other podcast, when I first came into this religion, I was brought up that there's, 8 different holidays, and number one, like I never really heard names for holidays outside of Yule.
Yeah.
And frankly, what we practiced in October, basically on Halloween, was a lot more like the Celtic Samhain, which that's not Norse.
It's its own thing.
Yeah, so, and that's not what I'm trying to do. So
what we usually do with holidays, and this was no different, is we always start with lighting a candle to whichever gods we're choosing to honor at that time. And since Disablot has a lot to do with women and female spirits, that's who we decided to honor. So we lit a candle for Frigga, for Freya, and then a general candle for all the other female ancestor spirits, as well as what's the word?
The Disir.
Disir. And the whole reason why it's called Disablot, right? And so we open up the altar with basically lighting those candles, and then you call them forth and say, I light this candle for Frigga, and for Freya, and for all the other women who watch over us. And we opened it up like that, and then I ended up saying that we wanted them to continue to watch over us for the coming winter, because it's probably going to be hard.
Yeah.
For more reason than one, but winters are usually tough, especially if you live where we're at in the north. We definitely get heavy snow.
Yep.
And this year's going to be no different, and it feels nice to ask the female spirits to be looking out for us, and that's what I asked them to do. And I also thank them for everything that we've had good this year. And then we reflected upon basically how women have affected us positively in this year. And like I talked about my mom, who's always been a big importance to me. And there's also my grandma, and remembering her, and your mother.
Yep.
And it's good stuff.
Yeah, well, and like that's my thing. Like, even though you're pretty new to this way, like,
this is the first time I led.
Yeah, if I'd been like a fly on the wall just watching it, like, I wouldn't have thought that you were inexperienced or anything like that. So I mean, good job.
Yeah, thanks. And like we spent a good time just reflecting upon it. We Zeke and I also both had a drink that I made. And I said on the previous podcast, but I made this particular punch that back in 2016 I made. It's like a boozy raspberry punch.
Yeah. And
I made a picture of it one time, and this is back when I was still living with my parents. And I left it in the fridge, and I came home wanting to drink it. And then both of my grandmas were talking to each other, which they don't do. They never got along. And they were happy and having fun, and then I go to grab my drink, and like almost all of it's gone. And I go, Mom, what happened to my drink? And she's like, oh, like that, like the grandmas really like the juice that you made. I'm like, Mom, that had stuff in it, like boozy stuff. And she goes, oh.
Yeah.
We didn't tell them, but they really liked it. But So I ended up making the same punch because it's a good memory and it's another way to honor your female relatives and stuff. And so I made that and I left a drink out for Frigga and Freya and the female spirits on the altar table, and I left that out for a couple of days. And then I also have made one for Zeke and I made one for myself as we reflected upon the positive womanly aspects that we've and influences we had in the last year.
Yeah, it was pretty nice. And like that's one thing I will say about just like holidays in general, not just that one, is I think that was a good experiment for us because like I've said a number of times, that was the first time that I've done something like that, and it felt right. Like I think my only like quibble was that it was just you and me.
Right.
Like, apart from that, like, I enjoyed it. Well, that and we did it on split days because it fell on a Wednesday and we both work and
Yeah, so we ended up picking it back up on Saturday when we actually still had time to, or had free time rather.
Yeah.
To continue it. So I made a big feast. I made a ham, again, using my mom's recipe or a rendition of it. Usually she uses like a raw ham while I used a cooked ham. But I made a ham. I made some homemade rolls that were really good. Some mashed potatoes that were seasoned just right.
Mm-hmm.
And some veggies too. And I invited my mom over and she came and that was nice. We got to play a couple of games and we drank a little bit. Yeah. And it was a lot of fun. The only thing that I regret doing, which I will definitely have to do next year, is making what I was going to make is monkey bread. And because the whole, like traditionally that I found in the research is that you're supposed to make a little cake and bury that in the ground.
Yeah.
And I forgot to do that.
Oops.
Yeah, we got a little carried away with the partying.
Yeah. Well, and like earlier that day, like we went to various cemeteries where we have ancestors buried and we visited them during the day. So
yeah, that's what we did during the day. We went to all of the different ancestors that we can think of in the area, direct ancestors. And there was yours and there was mine. Mm-hmm. And we bought carnations for all of them and made sure to honor them and cleaned up their graves a little bit and put down flowers for them. We did all of that in the beginning part of the day on Saturday.
Yeah.
Because it's, ancestor worship is very important. And even though some of the flowers that we put down weren't necessarily all female, because I know I put one on my grandfather's grave and you put one on like your great-great-grandfather's grave.
Right.
The whole point is we wouldn't be here without them. So it's always good to honor them.
Well, and that's the other thing I will say is like if you try to look up information on holidays that the Norse observed this time of year, like you'll find conflicting stuff. And one of them that they observed is Alphablot, which literally means sacrifice to the elves. And it appears that, they probably did some ancestor worship there. And it was believed that some elves are spirits of dead ancestors. I can do another video on that at another time. But because we didn't grow up in that kind of a culture and we're kind of trying to piece things together, I thought it was appropriate that, if there's multiple sources saying different holidays were practiced at the same time, that just tells me it's regional differences. And maybe we can incorporate a bit of all of these different Norse practices, Yeah. And, I mean, it felt appropriate to me,
Yeah.
That's just my opinion. My 2 cents. My hot take.
Well, I guess we can also talk about, like, what we used to do and now, like, how we think differently about oaths.
Well, yeah. So, when I first started doing this, one of the things we did for every bloat, regardless of what
every
it was,
one of them.
we would do 3 toasts. Everybody would toast a god or goddess, a hero or ancestor, and then we would do oaths. And originally, I do think the oaths were supposed to be, like, it was implied that it was optional, but the person leading it, he didn't exactly let it be known that it was optional, and it kind of put pressure on people to come up with
To
oaths.
always do an oath.
Well, and like a lot of times, because people didn't have an idea, because making an oath to do something, like, it's serious stuff, and sometimes you just don't have an idea. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. So and I was kind of guilty of this too. It's like sometimes you might pick something that's kind of silly, isn't really that important or well thought out. Like when you're going to make an oath, like you really should be thinking, okay, is this something that is clear, concise, and accomplishable?
And means something.
Yeah. And, is it impactful? Is this going to really matter in your life should you follow through? Because I've read like a bunch of historical sources and stuff, and while it does look like at certain feasts they would toast certain gods or goddesses because they're whole communities, the idea that each individual person would toast one is a little unrealistic. So it sounds like, as a community, the person leading it, typically from what I've read, the Jarl would probably toast a god that is the feast is specifically dedicated to. Some people might toast ancestors. It didn't seem to be too organized. Like, this is the time you're supposed to do it. Go.
Toast, boast, no. Go.
And it did look like some people would swear oaths on the sacrificial animal, whatever that happened to be. But even with oaths, number one, the thing with oaths that wasn't immediately made clear to me, probably should have been obvious, but it wasn't. So I definitely want to put it out there so people really understand what you're doing, is you're essentially making a contract with the gods, with your community, and with your ancestors who are all listening to you. Say you're going to do this thing, and it is a contract. It is a binding contract that no one's making you do. You're joining this of your own free will. And when you don't follow through, you break that contract. And just like in our legal system today, when when there's a breach of contract, there are consequences for you doing that. And I think that's something that people really need to keep in mind if you're thinking about, making an oath.
Right.
Hey, is this something you're really going to follow? Is this isn't some, thing that you were kind of inspired to do for like a second, and then afterwards you're like, nah, like New Year's resolutions,
right.
where so many people are like, I'm going to lose weight. And then they stick to it for like 2 weeks and then stop. Like,
Yeah.
This is serious stuff.
It's like, oh, I'm going to cut out popcorn out of my diet. And then a few weeks you eat popcorn. You're like, oh no, whoops.
Right. And again, I want to make this very clear. Like, I've been guilty of this too. Okay. Like, that's really why I want to talk about it so much, because I don't, want people to make mistakes that I've made or that I've seen be made. So like, if you're making an oath, like, just make sure like it's the real deal. You're gonna follow through, and make sure it's concise and accomplishable, like a clear set goal. Like, for example, like if you look at in the sagas, when a hero would make an oath, it was something clear, concise, and actionable. Like Ragnar Lothbrok. And I'm not saying this was a good idea, but he made this oath. He got super drunk at a feast and swore that he would invade England with a single longship of men. Next day, woke up, realized it was a terrible idea, but was like, oops, I made an oath, so guess what? We're going raiding in a single longship. And that's basically how he got captured, because it was really dumb to make an oath like that. But the point is, he understood...
Understood the assignment.
They understood just how important it was, regardless of his state of mind at the time. So even though he knew he was surely going to his death, he did it anyways. And that's the point. That's how you have to look at making an oath, that you will follow through with it, even if it means your own demise. That's how important it is. And you really got to think about it before you just swear to do something. Like, that's how important it is.
Basically, it shouldn't be used for something trivial. And I can give you 2 personal examples of oaths that we've personally made that have turned out to be beneficial. I know for you, when we first got married, like, you basically made an oath to not drink until I got pregnant.
Yeah.
Remember? And you held true to that.
Yep.
Until we found out I was pregnant. And for me personally, even though this might sound silly, but I'm glad that I made this oath. I made an oath that I actually thought about. And I said, okay, what I oath to do is to set my alarm in the morning and to get up. Mm-hmm. Like, not to push the snooze button. Which may sound silly, but to me it wasn't. Because I would be tired all day. I would sleep in the morning until the last possible minute. I would keep pushing the snooze button or have 3 alarms going off throughout the morning. And it just wasn't a healthy way to wake up and to get your day started. So I literally made the oath of, nope, if I set an alarm, I am waking up after I set that alarm. And I haven't gone back on that.
Yeah.
And literally my days are a lot better because of that.
Well, and like another oath that I did was actually to start this podcast.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not even so much like, if this podcast doesn't like end up going anywhere and, a whole lot of people don't end up seeing it, like, that's fine. That wasn't the point. The point was I needed an outlet. I felt like I had a message to get out there that I wanted to get out there. And for the longest time, I was just kind of sitting around not doing anything with it. And
you felt kind of trapped.
Yeah, it was kind of eating me up inside. Like, I know with my current job, like, it's not something that I want to do. And it's been this whole thing throughout my life is trying to figure out what do I want to do. And what's always brought me meaning is like spiritual stuff, religious stuff. That's something that has always brought me fulfillment, even back when I was a Christian, and it's still true today. And it's something that I really enjoy talking about. I enjoy participating about, thinking about it, debating. Oh, where do I start? How do I do this? And the point of the oath was to make sure that you just start. Screw being quote unquote good at it. Just start doing it. The rest will follow,
Well, and then also I should say, whenever we do make an oath, we always do a rune poll afterwards to basically get an insight of what the gods are thinking about our oath.
Right, like any hurdles that might come your way, obstacles that you'll have to overcome, things like that. So the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, just besides oaths, was just honestly other holidays and the fact that we really just don't know too much about how exactly they practice holidays, other than what I've already said is that obviously they would sacrifice an animal because bloat means sacrifice. They might toast a god. People might toast ancestors. Some people might make oaths, but as far as anything else, and obviously they would have a feast. Mm-hmm. As far as anything else, like, we just don't know.
Unfortunately, it's been lost to history.
Well, and like a lot of the people who wrote stuff down, they were either Christians or Romans, and they weren't being objective.
The unreliable narrator, if you will.
Yeah, and in some cases, like, the objective wasn't to say, oh, this is how what exactly they did, because in some stories it was already taken as a given what they would do, so it just wasn't necessary to say.
Right.
And I think my point is, what I'm trying to do is keep an open mind, make sure I read sources, but also figure out what works for today, what makes sense for today. Like, going back to, why did I choose, why did I say we should celebrate Disablot over, say, Alpha Bloat, like I brought up? And I think mostly that's because Alpha Bloat was normally, well, both holidays are done after harvest, but I think Alpha Bloat has more to do with the agriculture side of things, and that's just not really applicable to today's life. So I think Disablot is slightly more appropriate for the lives we're living now. And the idea that is that I think we should think about history as much as we can, and then consider how would our ancestors' beliefs had changed over time had they never converted to Christianity.
Right. So, and then also, it's like obviously animal sacrifice was a big part of traditional celebrations,
Right.
which we obviously don't do. And but what we do make sure to do is we always have a glass of mead or wine or some kind of drink to offer to the gods.
Yeah.
Because that's something we can do.
Yeah. And, another thing you do if you like the idea of a toast, both, and oath ritual, especially in smaller groups, absolutely go for it. Just keep in mind if your group extends to like 20 people, you might want to do something else. But for small groups, that's something that's like really doable and kind of has its own specialness to it,
Yeah. And it's just, you do what feels right. There's no set rule here.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you want to do everything in respect to the gods and your ancestors, foremost. But as long as the intent is there and there's no malice behind it, you can't mess it up,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's also my other thing too, is like I see a lot of people, bragging about how there's no rules. And every time I see that, I'm like, yeah, but, and I know I would probably get a lot of flack from that from a lot of different people in the overall pagan community. But, I think it's something that needs to be addressed. I think there's too many people who look at the fact that there's no quote unquote rules, like Christianity has rules, and then just take that to mean that they can do whatever they want.
Right.
And I just don't think that's true. It doesn't ring true in my soul. And I think back on our history, and, they, for one, had a lot of traditions that they valued immensely, but they also had socially enforced customs and morals, which are rules in their own right. And I think when people think of, oh, there's no rules, you can't tell me how to be a pagan, I think they're thinking about it from a modern idea of separation of church and state, which people got to understand. This is an incredibly modern concept. And there's a lot of places in the world to this day who don't have that. And I think that absolutely applied to our pagan ancestors as well. Like, something that's a rather taboo subject that we don't like talking about is human sacrifice. We know human sacrifice happened in the past, but it was almost always like criminals and prisoners of war. And it was typically done in punishment for those things. It just had religious overtones on it, and that's why it was called a sacrifice. There's also been kings who were sacrificed, but they were sacrificed because the people weren't doing well. Like there's famine, there's pestilence, bad things happening under this king, which the people interpreted to be the fault of the king. This is why all these bad things are happening. These why our crops are failing. So they would kill him. They would quote unquote sacrifice him, but the sacrifice wasn't like, so these spirits can enjoy blood. No, it was an execution of a ruler who was not performing their duties in order to bring sanctity back to that office, if you will, to use more modern language. But that's what they were doing, and I think it's really easy for modern day people to forget about these things that our ancestors lived with day to day.
Well, and here's the thing too, is I don't agree with the aspect of there are no rules, because I guess they're not written like 10 commandments are, but that's also pretty much proven what our ancestors valued were like truth, justice, and being an actual helpful member to your community. And those require rules and morals.
Yeah.
To value those things to begin with. Like, you have to, to follow these certain sets of community guidelines. And yeah, it's not like a set, like, oh, you must do this, you must do that. It's just value is something that, was a part of their life.
Yeah. And, as a solitary practitioner saying, oh, there's no rules, I think that's perfectly fine. But again, like, that's not my goal. My goal is to have a community. And if you want any community to function, then there has to be at least agreed upon values. I'll go ahead and shy away from the word rules because I think it kind of makes people think of 10 Commandments.
Right.
Of like written down laws. And that's not so much what we're saying. What we're saying is that if you want harmony in a community, then there needs to be an agreed set of values. And it's okay for those values to differ from community to community. That's perfectly fine. And that's where the no rules in paganism comes into play. Because no two communities have to follow the same exact rule. No two tribes have to follow the same exact rules. But within the tribe, I think there absolutely needs to be rules that you agree upon
or values you agree upon.
Yeah, and that you guys need to live by.
Well, and then here's the whole point of the podcast is we're all trying to find the good life.
Yeah.
How can you do that when you don't have a set ambition in mind?
Yeah, and I think that's what we're really trying to flesh out. And that's just what I think right now. That's my hot take. And I'll probably get a lot of backlash for it because some people might think it sounds too Christian. And you know what? As much of a beef as I have with Christian as an ideology, I kind of think they got some things right. Okay. Having a community with shared values, I think is a good thing, is a right thing. And if I try to play devil's advocate with myself and talk about how it's not a good thing, I can't do it honestly with myself. I just can't go there. But, this is just our opinions, really.
Right.
Like you don't have to take it as gospel. That's just what I genuinely believe.
Right.
And I kind of felt like I had to get it out there.
Yeah.
Again, that's my hot take. Thumbs up.
Right. Well, that was a fun conversation.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that'll be about all for today. If you have any questions, comments, or want to talk about how I am wrong, that is perfectly fine. And we encourage friendly debate. So go ahead, please comment, subscribe. And
you can also let us know what kind of holidays you personally like to celebrate within the Norse pantheon. That'd be cool.
Yeah, because we're absolutely open to ideas. Because again, we're just trying to find the way to the good life, and there's a lot of work that we got to do. A lot of stuff that has just been lost to time, and we somewhat have to kind of recreate and rediscover. So hey, if you guys got ideas, we're all ears.
Yeah.
We'll listen. I'm not trying to act like I know everything.
No,
I don't. Anyway, so I think that'll be all for today.
Yeah,
Until next
sounds good.
time.
Bye.